Hello and welcome back to On the Brink with Castle Island. This is Nick Carter. Today we have one of my very favorite people in the industry on the show, Josh Cincinnati. Lots of you will know him. He's an incredibly entertaining follow on Twitter. He has a great sense of humor, and for the last couple of years he also ran the Zcash Foundation. Now, you might know that the power at Zcash is split up into the Electric Coin Company, and then the foundation was created subsequently in kind of an attempt to distribute control and achieve more decentralization over the governance of Zcash, realistically. Josh has since left, which gives us the opportunity to reflect back on his tenure and on the history of Zcash governance, which is a very interesting and somewhat contentious topic. On our prior episode with James Prestwich, we talked about it, and this gives us another opportunity to candidly reflect on the history of Zcash and the potential pitfalls of having direct protocol monetization through the distribution of resources directly from issuance. Now, I had a bit of an audio snafu on this episode. I selected the wrong input for my audio, and as a result, my audio is a little bit garbled, but luckily for us, Josh's audio sounds great, and he's really the star of the show. So we're going to go right to Josh Cincinnati. This was such a great conversation, and I'm really glad that I was able to sit down with him.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Josh Cincinnati, you're one of my favorite people in the crypto industry.
Oh, likewise, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you for appearing on our great show. Hopefully I can return the favor one day and come on your own podcast. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you can make the interview work within the 2-minute time limit that we have with Josh.
Yeah, there's some really serious constraints, but I think I'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for you? Because your voice sounds great, and we were talking about this before the episode. We were talking about how the phrase dulcet tones, you only ever hear dulcet used in that exact context.
Yeah.
And never outside of that. But your tones truly are dulcet.
Oh, thank you.
And, partly that's because you bought some really nice audio equipment. So maybe before we start, why don't we cover that important topic? What was the catalyst for you improving your audio setup over there?
Oh, well, actually, I think it was partially feedback like that my dulcet it doesn't really work, does it? Dulcet voice just doesn't sound right.
That's no good.
No good. But in any event, there was feedback that people seem to enjoy the little twadcasts that I was putting together, and so I decided to up my game a bit and get that equipment. But actually, what really got me into even doing the stupid little Twitter podcast thing was, I think it was seeing you, Nick, post a Twitter voice thing and realizing that I was not one of the lucky few in that Twitter rollout. And so as you may know, all of my Twitter voice, Josh's Dumb Voice podcast, it's actually just like it's an ersatz Twitter voice. It's not really Twitter voice. I faked it.
It's homebrewed.
Yeah.
Bootleg.
Yeah, it's bootleg. Exactly. It's a little audio moonshine, as I like to say.
Much moonshine, it's better than the store-bought stuff.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
But there's a 5% chance that you go blind.
Oh yeah, or deaf, I guess, listening to it in my case. But it was a lot of seeing that people were starting with that format, and I have to admit, like, I made the first few, twads, as they are kind of terribly coined. I made the first few of them were to make fun of the format. And as I started doing that, I discovered that I enjoyed the medium that I was making fun of and this very meta realization. So I just kept doing them for a little while,
That's how they get you.
It is.
They snared you in. I mean, it is a fun medium because you can impress your voice upon people in your feed who are normally just consuming your content with their eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a really aggressive thing. It's like, no, people didn't wake up this morning expecting to like hear me shouting at them from Twitter.
Yeah.
They wanted to passively consume. Now it's a new dimension.
And now and the beautiful thing is, if you keep doing it, eventually, almost like a Pavlovian response, you can start to get people to read your passive Twitter messages in your own voice, rather than their own internal monologue. So that's really the goal. I just want to live. I want my voice to live in everyone's, in everyone's mind, rent free. That's the goal.
Because maybe people read your tweets and don't even know what you sound like.
Yeah.
So you really need to close that chasm.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, for our listeners' sake, I'm glad that you have some high quality equipment. Sounds great. Very much dulcet. The subject of today's podcast is very serious, though it's not comedic. Although maybe it will be. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out.
We're going to talk about governance, just the G word. Really tough concept. Much ink has been spilled over it. So, for context, you were the executive director of the Zcash Foundation for some years. How long was your tenure over there?
So I was at the Zcash Foundation for 3 years and an executive director for like 2.5.
And you effectively, would it be appropriate to say you kind of designed the structure for the foundation? You're involved in the structuring of the foundation?
Yeah, I joined the foundation, a little bit after the initial incorporation, and there are some moving, parts there that were already in play. But I would say that it is fair to say. I mean, I was the first full-time employee there, and then the first outside of the board of directors at that point, and certainly definitely someone who had influence on the shape and direction of the broader governance discussions in the Zcash ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's fair.
So it's not a secret that you've since left or stepped down from that role, which gives us a great chance to have a retrospective.
Yeah.
On the topic. So maybe we can start at the beginning. I mean, when you were thinking about setting up the foundation or getting involved, were there other foundation case studies that you thought were ones to follow, or was it all in the negative sense, like looking at the Bitcoin Foundation and just trying to avoid that kind of situation?
Can I say shit on the podcast, Nick?
You may.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I want to calibrate for my audience here. So, but yeah, not to shit on the Bitcoin Foundation, because they're really a pioneer. But that was certainly something that I was viewing in a negative relief. Trying to understand what went wrong there, and to try and prevent that in the formation of the Zcash Foundation. But beyond that, there weren't really a lot of good crypto examples. There were lots of great nonprofit open source software examples, for sure. Places like the EFF and the Free Software Foundation, the way that the Rust community and the Rust development process has been built has been a great guiding presence as well. So there are definitely great examples that you could draw from, but there wasn't really at the time, I think, in my view anyway, a truly stellar example of how one should set up a cryptocurrency foundation. So I did my best at kind of taking a shot at building what I thought would be the right kind of cryptocurrency nonprofit that was not just something not just a vehicle for as we've seen in many other foundations, like self-promotion of the people involved, or some kind of extractive body that's just designed to enrich the people that were associated with the foundation. That wasn't the case at all at the Zcash Foundation, and I'm actually really proud of how we were kind of in my view anyway, among cryptocurrencies, an exception to that pattern.
Right. Yeah, and I'd say the other class of foundations is also just the shell foundation, where they don't have any meaningful power. They just exist to kind of warehouse maybe some treasury or some coins, raised in a crowd sale or something. And the real objective is to keep a nominal difference between the proceeds of a crowd sale and then a corporate entity that might be managing the blockchain itself. And it's more of sort of just a regulatory play. I think that's why we have the Crypto Valley and Zug and so on. That's sort of the other class of foundation I would say exists.
I would agree. And I think to the extent that we did a good job of establishing the foundation, we had that in mind, that we didn't want the Zcash Foundation to merely be this kind of empty shell with no weight or power in the ecosystem. And on the plus side, I think that we demonstrated that throughout the various Zcash debates that happened about governance, that I'm sure we're going to dive into in a moment. But so we definitely demonstrated that. But I will say it wasn't like, it definitely wasn't without cost, because I certainly, at least for me personally, it definitely affected my working relationship with the other primary organization that was working on Zcash, the Electric Coin Company, and and their leadership. And that was certainly, like, I think having that self-reflection and understanding that that there were scars from us being a truly independent foundation, scars that weren't going to heal or be ameliorated as long as I was there, was a part of the catalyst for me leaving as well.
So one thing I wanted to zoom in on, you mentioned inspiration from other open source modes of governance. We had a great episode with Joseph Jacks of Open Source Capital, and we talked about the difference between governing a bizarre style open source project, and then commercial open source, and then open source as it pertains to a monetary system, which is a very special case in my opinion. And I've always had this intuition that you can't just transpose the historical kind of functional governance processes that we've seen in successful open source to a monetary system, because the stakes are so much higher, and because there's sort of the direct potential for, enriching the protocol insiders, so to speak. Is this kind of an intuition that you share as well?
Oh, yeah, that resonates with me completely. Because I think, and this is the challenge that any, as you say, that any foundation that is focused on a protocol that aims to be money, when that foundation, or really any other entity, but it could be, a for-profit corporation, it could be a collective, it could be whatever, really, as long as it's a center of power, perceived or otherwise, in that ecosystem, as long as they wield that power, they have a fair bit of authority in determining the shape and direction and development of that protocol. And as a result, there is this just tremendous risk of them basically engaging in extractive or rent-seeking behavior. And to the Zcash Foundation's credit, I really feel like they did while I was there, we did a good job of pushing back against what is a very tempting, I think very tempting, especially for organizations that are, by their nature as nonprofits, like typically cash strapped. When you're literally in the business of making money, it is so hard to resist the urge to quite literally make money for yourself,
Right.
and to do so in a way that would, I think, sidestep kind of consensus and community buy-in. And I like to think that we didn't do that at the foundation. There is a portion of funds from the resulting dev fund debate that will be going to the foundation. But one of the reasons that, one of the reasons that I left the foundation was to demonstrate that like this, that decision was made while I was in charge. It wasn't actually the decision that I personally wanted, but even so, it's something that happened while I was head of the foundation. And I don't think if you do engineer, if those sorts of things are engineered and happen such that an organization that you're involved with becomes a beneficiary of that activity, I think there's actually a very strong, I think there's a moral imperative to demonstrate that you're not going to personally take advantage of it. And that was part of my decision as well.
So you mentioned this renegotiation or alteration to the dev fund. I think many people are vaguely aware that there was some sort of reinterpretation there, but many Bitcoiners probably won't be familiar with the whole kind of history there. So why don't you talk us through your understanding of what the initial setting was in terms of the monetary issuance breakdown, who was entitled to what, and then what was subsequently decided through this process of negotiation much more recently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I and obviously, like I think the caveat that you already suggested in the formulation of that question, that it's from my perspective very strongly applies. I don't have all of the information, and it might even, memory is a faulty thing. So I will do the best to express my view of how things shook out from my perspective. But caveat, is it lector? No, not lector. I can't remember my Latin. Who caveat listener, whatever the listener cognate might be. Okay. So my perspective on this whole situation. One of the things that I am actually by nature a Bitcoiner, and I've been a Bitcoiner for a while. But I got excited about Zcash because I recognized that that there were two, at the time when I was looking at it, like two issues with Bitcoin that seemed a long ways off from being solved. One of them was base layer privacy, and the other was figuring out a way to ethically align incentives for early development in a way that would, benefit folks early on. I think actually, to be honest, today, Bitcoin in some respects in a very patchwork fashion, but has solved that second problem. In fact, you wrote a very good article about how it has. So I won't. I'll let listeners find that on their own. But that first problem is something that was, that still exists and is important, I think, for Bitcoiners, to recognize. But I ended up getting interested in Zcash because it seemed like that technology was interesting, and I thought that the initial founders reward mechanism was a smart way to bootstrap that early development, in a way that was like ethical and aligned with the interests of the project and of the ecosystem at large. So to those who don't know, the founders reward, and because if you're a Bitcoiner, the Bitcoin supply schedule. Zcash follows the overall Bitcoin supply schedule with a few nuances on the early issuance, but effectively you can imagine that, like Bitcoin, in the first 4 years of Zcash's issuance, there will be 10.5 million ZEC as it's colloquially known, minted by miners. And the Founders Reward was a method by which 20% of that ZAC, as it was being mined, so not immediately, not like a pre-mine, but as it was being mined, would be granted to a number of entities. I think early investors in the Electric Coin Company, which was the primary company involved in development of Zcash, but early investors, employees, a small strategic reserve for that company. And actually, eventually, the foundation itself was a beneficiary of this Founders Reward, but in a sort of indirect way, in that a bunch of those early employees and investors pledged their Founders Reward coins to the foundation to establish it as an independent second party working on Zcash.
And just to be clear, so that 20% of that initial 4-year supply is 10% of the fully diluted supply.
That's right. 10% of the fully diluted supply. And I very much consider myself a Bitcoiner, but Zcash is not Bitcoin, and I thought it was fair to experiment with these kinds of early development bootstrapping financial models, and I thought it made a lot of sense at the time, and it still does, I think, to this day. Like, I don't think I would have changed anything with how that was structured. I will say that it was my impression, and I think if you look, you'll never see this explicitly stated by the Electric Coin Company or anyone who was originally involved in that formulation of the Founders Reward. But as a community member at that time, my impression was that that would be a temporary bootstrapping mechanism, and that there would be no subsequent Founders Reward style, vested coin generation for really anyone, anyone else. I simply thought like that was sort of it, and then the foundation would have migrated to a donor-based model, and the ECC would have migrated to a different business model, and that would be the end of that. But as you can tell by the tone and the direction that this answer is taking, that was not to be the case. And what wound up happening is that there were rumblings of there being a desire to extend that Founders Reward, but call it something else, the developer fund, or dev fund for short. And that instead of it, rightfully, instead of it benefiting any investors, it would purely go to the entities that are working on Zcash, or maybe grants for people that could work on Zcash in the future. And this, I think I first heard about it privately from some folks in 2019, and then I first heard about it publicly on the forums in May 2019 on the the Zcash community forums. And for me personally, and I've said this before, but it put me in a kind of weird spot, because I had a duty to the board of directors of the foundation, like any executive director at a nonprofit, and that I need to serve to the best of my ability and to the way that they want me to serve the board. But I also personally had a very strong dislike and almost like a knee-jerk revulsion at the idea of extending this extending or creating a new dev fund, because to me it felt like a violation of an implicit social contract that existed in the beginning of Zcash. And but ultimately, my personal feelings were less important than my role as someone running a foundation, trying to balance and compromise, trying to find that balance and compromise amongst all the ecosystem participants. And so, I didn't push back, I think, as hard as I would have if the foundation was a dictatorship of Josh, which I'm glad it wasn't for that matter. But
So what was the, so there was a negotiation, there was a debate.
Yep.
I kept up with it a little bit. How did it shake out in the end? I mean, what
Yeah.
became the subsequent distribution of rewards?
Yeah, so the final tally, after all was said and done, and it is actually a quite a dramatic tale, because in between, that hearing about it and finally reaching a resolution with the and reaching consensus with the broader community, the foundation and the electric coin company, in between all of that, there was this underwriting assumption that there would be a trademark agreement between the ECC and the Zcash Foundation that defined this governance model that we like to call 2 of 2 multisig, where both the Zcash Foundation and the ECC would have to agree on the legal definition of Zcash for purposes of protecting the mark.
In the case of a fork, for instance?
Yeah, exactly. In the case of a fork or a disagreement about a network upgrade, which obviously that doesn't really happen. In the Bitcoin world, there's a much more there's no trademark because it's all prior art, and two, there's more of a grassroots consensus building that happens, as you saw in the Segwick adventures of 2017 in terms of what defines Bitcoin, and all of the subsequent Bitcoin forks that have utterly failed to capture the same kind of market dominance as what the broader community thinks is Bitcoin. Well, for better or for worse, there is a Zcash trademark, and it's certainly, given that there is a trademark, there is this sense that it shouldn't be held by a single entity. And so given that it existed, there's this pull to figure out a way of distributing power so that it wasn't just up to one entity to legally define what Zcash is. So if there was a contentious fork, for example, that entity couldn't go to all the regulated exchanges in the US and say, you can't call that Zcash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something that was just sort of something that needed to be decided in a way that still distributed power away from a single entity. And this, I actually thought that the 2 of 2 idea was a solid one, in that both the ECC and the foundation, with slightly differing incentives and perspectives, would have to agree on what constitutes Zcash. And there was this assumption and negotiation that was happening throughout most of 2019, that an agreement like that would be struck, and that we would sign that, and that was in at least the foundation's mind, not just my own, but also the board of the foundation. It was a preamble to a successful dev fund negotiation, was having that agreement in place so that the foundation could actually use its weight and use its voice to affirm what what actually would constitute Zcash, in addition to the foundation building its own Zcash node software. So there's sort of there's this balance of soft, or explicit power in the legal agreement, and then softer power in terms of people actually choosing to run the foundation's node software as well. So and that's a lot of background context, but ultimately, one of the other things that happened in the process of this dev fund debate is that the ECC, reneged on that widely known structure. In the middle of this debate, they said they would like to have a third party be involved without much warning. And it kind of threw everybody for a loop, myself included. And it basically led to the foundation saying, okay, well, we're not going to actually engage in any kind of, measurement of community will or consensus if this agreement isn't set, because otherwise any result can actually be enforced by us and have the imprinter of both organizations. And the good news is that we did reach a resolution in accordance with that initial framework, and that, in fact, the whole legal document that describes that arrangement is actually up on the foundation's GitHub, so you can read through all 100 pages if you're if you're so inclined or interested. But that was a absolutely necessary like preliminary requirement for us to feel like we would have any sort of legitimacy in the decision making process, rather than it just being, decentralization theater.
So just to maybe summarize that, you felt that as a key stakeholder in the Zcash ecosystem that had been created subsequent to the creation of the ECC, but a key stakeholder who part of your mandate was to counterbalance the power of the ECC.
Yep.
You deserved effectively equal say in the effectively the ontology of Zcash, the project, and being able to determine what constituted validity, and which fork, in the case of a fork, had a true claim to the Zcash name as instrumentalized by the trademark. And so that was kind of a necessary precondition.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also from our perspective, it was a widely known process and expectation by anyone in Zcash that there would be this sharing of the trademark prior to this decision. And I think that that fair, and maybe I'm giving the foundation too much credit here, but I think it's fair to say that people in the community viewed the foundation as an advocate for the community's choice over, let's say, arbitrary decision making by other parties in the ecosystem. And so I think people widely viewed it as an important backstop for the foundation to have that power. And that's not to say that that's the only power that matters,
right.
Because
it's kind of a last resort almost. I mean, it's like the nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
People don't know, but I mean, it's hard power, really. The Ethereum Foundation has the trademark to Ethereum, if I'm not mistaken, but they've never had to wield it. Even in the most critical situation was the creation of Ethereum Classic. They didn't have to wield it. Soft power was sufficient.
Yeah.
However, they might have to one day. I mean, especially around a 2.0 kind of situation.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, it should come as no surprise that I am a bit of a radical when it comes to intellectual property rights and law, and especially for crypto projects. I definitely think the Bitcoin path, and I suppose actually the Monero path, is preferable, where there's no trademark whatsoever. And there's really just this much more anarchic method of deciding what constitutes that, the eventual asset is really based on what the community and market effectively decide. And, certainly dangerous for someone who's starting a project to give up that control. But I think a recurring theme that I've encountered, at least in my experience in the cryptocurrency industry, for people starting new projects, is everyone makes claims that they're going to give up power, and then when push comes to shove, oftentimes they hesitate because they're too worried about what will happen when they do, and it's this almost like project paternalism, I guess.
Yes,
and it's I get where it comes from, but I think it's also really. If you're trying to create robust intergenerational money or financial, instruments of sorts that will last generations, and not just some new social networking app or something, if you're doing that, then you need to have the will and conviction, and I think the Constitution, to simply let go, at a certain point.
Yeah. This is where I have to interject with my favorite ever tweet, which comes courtesy of Angela Walsh, who's a bit of a bête noire for the crypto industry sometimes.
Yeah.
But I like her. And her tweet is, public blockchains are Marxist in their goals and Leninist in their implementations, which strikes directly at the core of what you're saying here. in other words, she's saying people that create public blockchains have these utopian objectives and this belief, maybe even a sincere belief, that they will be able to decentralize power and effectively dissolve the state. Engels talks about the withering state. They really believe that they'll be able to dissolve those administrative functions post mainnet launch, and then when push comes to shove, they realize, oh, actually, it'd be great if I had a little bit more discretion, a little bit more control, and there's a lot of risk involved in giving up power, and maybe now it looks more like a Leninist, dictatorship.
Yeah, and then eventually, well on its way to Stalinist, and all of a sudden, all the Trotskyites are out, right? Like, whoops.
Luckily, we haven't had any blockchain gulags yet.
No, but that is a one. I also like, because I sometimes have like really good spirited debates with Angela about, it's mostly about the liability of like public of public blockchain developers, because she has divergent views, I think, from a lot of folks in the ecosystem, but they're worth exploring, and that I do appreciate her viewpoint a great deal, and actually love seeing her tweets, especially those ones like that are extremely insightful and pithy. And I think that does like sort of speak to the heart of it, that there is always this temptation and draw to simply exert power when you have it, and it takes a great deal, I think, of circumspection and perspicacity to say, no, I'm not going to do that, and to know that it will benefit the project, in the long term, right?
If I had to add to that, I would say it's often not even necessarily an individual's choice. It becomes a decision which no individual can make to surrender power once that they've created organizations and created new stakeholders and set things in motion. At that point, they no longer have the ability to reduce the kind of administrative creep, or like the scope creep of the organizations that, help administer these blockchains. So once you've created a corporation or a foundation, now you have shareholders, you have employees, they have families. Like, it becomes much more difficult to wind down and say, hey, we're going to, put down our sword. We're going to retire, and go back to the farm, basically.
Yeah, it is like extraordinarily difficult to do that. And I mean, even, not to get too personal about it, but even me, leaving the foundation, I knew that it wouldn't affect the well-being of the foundation itself, because the treasury is good. There are great people there, but I felt, there was definitely part of me that felt that leaving was a bit like retiring too early and abandoning things. And it's a hard decision to make, especially when there are all those personal angles there,
So maybe just to refocus slightly,
sure.
It might be helpful actually at this stage to explore what the mandate of the Zcash Foundation was and is, because we didn't actually cover that. And I always thought it was interesting that you guys gave grants to non-Zcash projects, as well as Zcash community projects.
Yeah, so the foundation, and I apologize if I'm paraphrasing this incorrectly, but the mission of the foundation is really to promote and protect privacy, protecting financial infrastructure on the internet, primarily through Zcash, but obviously, as you said, not just through Zcash. So we have often, when I was at the foundation, we've given money to Tor, to Open Privacy, to the Human Rights Foundation, to do a series of pieces of research on privacy and cryptocurrencies. Today, we've given money to the Open Money Initiative. It's not just focused on on Zcash. Of course, predominantly we were Zcash was our primary focus, so the vast majority of our funding went into either internal development of node software and research and development that the foundation's been doing through our really top-notch engineering team that's over there, or grants to Zcash ecosystem participants that were developing things that we felt were necessary in order to bolster more usage of private transactions on Zcash. Because unlike some other projects, privacy is not really unfortunately is not really the default behavior in Zcash. You have to know what you're doing to engage in truly private transactions. But when you do, they are indeed the best privacy preserving technique for obfuscating the transaction graph that exists today. So we saw that there are lots of gaps there, and try to focus grants toward filling those gaps. So like in GUI support for Z2Z transactions across Windows, Linux, and Mac, on mobile, on hardware wallets and the like. So it was a pretty it was a broad mandate with a focus on Zcash, but it wasn't our only focus.
Yeah, not to turn this interview into too much of a hagiography, but I was always very impressed by that.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I think you guys even made grants to Monero-related projects at certain points as well.
Yeah, we. I think that the best example of that was this is actually more of a we had an oh shit moment when we realized in 2019 that the big conference that we organize every year, ZCon, was the same weekend as the big Monero conference in the US. And that was totally unintentional. And we were worried, is this going to fan further, flames and diverge these communities even more when, frankly, they should actually be collaborating a lot more because we share a lot of the same goals. And luckily we kind of turned that into an opportunity for greater collaboration and said, why don't we have a cross-conference panel to talk about privacy and regulation mainly, so that we were actually having that simultaneously at both conferences. And we actually helped provide in Monero, I might add, we met their funding goal on the Monero form funding system for the conference so that they could hold it. So I was pretty happy about that. That was a really great moment.
So maybe to tie up the thread on the historical analysis here, what happened in that debate, and what was kind of the final outcome there?
Yeah, sure. You asked that question 20 minutes ago, Nick, and I apologize.
I know, but we've had some great dalliances.
Yeah, I enjoy the dalliance. So the end result of that debate, after all was said and done, there are many different proposals that were submitted. Anyone could submit a proposal. And it would be evaluated, at least from the foundation's perspective. We had a long list of criteria about how we would evaluate community support for each individual proposal, including voting on the forum and voting through this community advisory panel. But we made it pretty clear that ultimately that would be inputs into the board's decision of what it would support. And then the ECC, had their own method that I think closely mirrored our own, but maybe had a few differences in interpreting community sentiment. But long and short of it is that the proposal that wound up capturing the most support was one that provided, I think, 35% of a continued 20%. So let's say, sorry, I should be explicit here. 20% of the next of the next 4-year period. So before the next halving on Zcash, 20% of that mining reward. Of that 20%, 35% of the 20% would go to the Electric Coin Company. 25% would go to the Zcash Foundation, and 40% would go to the Zcash Foundation, but earmarked specifically for a new body called the Major Grant Review Committee that was to be, and actually was just elected by that same community advisory panel, that would basically operate completely independently of the foundation, but would be under the foundation's financial umbrella just to make things easier for them. So that was the conclusion after all was said and done. And I still, in my heart of hearts, wish that there wasn't a dev fund personally, but I think that the end result was one that did have a lot of buy-in and ultimately will be productive and positive for the Zcash ecosystem, even if it wasn't what I wanted personally.
So to summarize that, to date, Zcash has had a halving already. Is that correct, or are they imminently having one?
I believe it's imminently having a halving.
So 10% of fully diluted supply was set aside for investors, ECC, like various third parties, and then some of it was eventually earmarked for development, although not all of it. Then subsequently, following this debate, 5% of fully diluted supply on top of that will be administered to these three entities: ECC, Foundation, Grant Review Committee, for a total of effectively 15% of fully diluted supply.
That is correct. That's how it stands today.
And then, in theory, 4 years from now, there'll be some additional negotiation, perhaps, or at the very least, the future beyond 4 years out is uncertain.
Yes, and at least for my personal view, I would hope that there isn't yet another dev fund in that time. I personally think that if any combination of bodies, of governing bodies, whether it's like the Foundation, the ECC, and the new MGRC, or some other ecosystem participants, can negotiate another dev fund 4 years from now, then I just think that the project risks basically becoming tied to this mechanism that will always, in my view anyway, always at steady state result in some kind of rent seeking or resource capture by the institutions or people involved. I think that's the unfortunate thing. There are a lot of interesting, in the winning proposal, there are a lot of interesting transparency requirements that are mandated for the ECC and Foundation, but it doesn't really say anything about how does the community react if these transparency requirements aren't met, or if they are met and they're met improperly, or you find out that let's say the foundation spent all of its money on a giant yacht party, right? That is something that would be super inappropriate, and would be, I think, if it was just the market, and the foundation was a for-profit entity that had a business model, and it was choosing to spend its money on a yacht party because that's the best way to allocate its capital, that would be one thing. But since it's purely an almost semi-guaranteed stream of funding, that's another. And so I'm concerned. I think you can do these things for short periods of time, but I worry a lot about how you create an enduring institution that is ethical, that can maintain a long-term incentive-aligned approach to making revenue off of the issuance of the actual protocol. I think it's possible, but it's just very, very difficult.
Do you think that this, because there's certainly some amount of disillusionment or disappointment with the renegotiation? At least on my part, full disclosure, I was in the same boat as you. I thought that the 20% or 10% of fully diluted supply, I thought that was the sum total of it, as far as redirecting minor rewards or validated rewards. So I was actually pretty surprised when this happened. Do you think that partly this was due to a poor codification of the social contract? I mean, would a formalization of that contract have sort of helped avoid this situation?
I do think so. I think there's, and I don't know that this was, by malicious intent or just a lack of specificity, but the fact that that wasn't explicitly stated and promised was, I think, a big deficiency in the early establishment of Zcash. And, because ultimately, what's interesting is, like, if it had been a dev fund that was 10% issuance, but over the lifetime of the protocol, for example, I think that would have been totally reasonable if that was the understood. I don't want to say constitution, but the starting. If those were the starting conditions that everyone agreed to, and that you were getting involved in the project with that knowledge, then that would have been completely copacetic, in my view. And to be honest, like, it's one of the things that I really love about Bitcoin, that to date, no other project in my mind has really come close to having a crispness of understanding in what the implicit social contract is, and just the strong response that you'll get from people when you try to modify the terms. You just don't see that really anywhere else. And I love some of the experiments going on Ethereum, for example. I obviously love all the work and development that's happening on Zcash. But in the Ethereum case, a great example of something that doesn't really ring true to me, even if this might be for the best for monetary policy. The constant refrain that the Ethereum monetary supply is the minimal amount to keep the network secure does not strike me as like a ironclad social contract that will resist all attempts at capture.
Right. Yeah, I mean, who sets the minimum?
Exactly. Who sets the minimum? What defines the minimum? Is it a council that sets it? Is it what's the governing body? It leads to all of these instances where you can create opportunities for people to grab power, and oftentimes in ways that aren't transparent to anybody else. And I don't mean that to like pile onto Ethereum. I just, I think it's important to contrast what is a robust implicit social contract and one that is, in my view, like there's a lot of risk for even for people who have very good intentions, that there's risk for capture there.
So one concept that I draw on when I think about these systems would be this notion of aid dependency in international development, which you might be familiar with. I mean, basically the idea is if the aid issued to some, economic region it is at a scale that it sort of eclipses the local economic output, then the economic incentive of those individuals, or some repressed region, is to sort of reconfigure itself in order to acquire more aid, to sort of optimize itself for the money spigot. And then you look at bureaucracies emerging and graft and so on. And the more aid you give, the outcomes aren't necessarily better. It's just that, and this probably sounds cold-hearted of me, but I mean, it's a kind of a well-established problem in development. Giving more aid doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes. It just leads to the creation of bureaucracies which are optimized for receiving aid. And it also just ultimately changes the sort of economic activities occurring in a specific country. I mean, the other analogy would be Dutch disease, which is
Yes. Yeah.
a commodity which starts to dominate your exports. The whole economic activity of the country becomes reconfigured, specifically tilting itself towards that industry, whether it's oil or lumber or whatever it is, and other industries suffer. So, you can probably see the analogy I'm making here. Do you think that is a potential affliction if there's, a corporate entity or another entity which is their primary business model has to do with ongoing flow from rewards from a protocol?
Oh yeah, I think without strong powers to oppose and keep that accountable, keep their activity accountable, and really methods for changing the flow of that issuance, or having some kind of reprimand or punishment, I suppose. Without those controls or avenues for recompense in place, I see it as an inevitability, and in fact, you can see it with lots of other, large outside of the crypto world, but still in the open source world. One could argue that, what's happening with Mozilla today is like a great example of an organization that has been sort of reconfigured in that way. I don't know if this is really recent, but like they had, the U.S. is suing Google, for antitrust violations, I believe. Really fascinating to see how that's going to go. But like Mozilla had this real, just I would call it this tepid initial response about how, well, it's not, Google's not really a monopoly. It's all okay. It just felt really like they were worried about losing their giant money spigot from Google if this legislation comes through. And I don't mean we don't have to get into a discussion about whether Google's actually a monopoly or not. But given like that Mozilla wound up having this big, they've fired a bunch of folks recently that were working on like really interesting cutting edge web research. But meanwhile, their executives are still paid millions of dollars in this weird, hybrid structure model. It just strikes me as something that is indicative of what a lot of these crypto foundations could become or have become even as a result of this sort of resource or aid related, an analogous curse that you describe. So I would caution everyone who's involved in foundations or part of them to really apply that lens and think about things in terms of second or third order effects, and that more formalization of where political power exists and how it can be pushed back is very, very good to have.
Yeah, I recommend Angela's paper on decentralization. I think it's a critical look at decentralization of major crypto projects. Yeah. And I don't exactly remember what it's called, but I think she coined this notion of the veil of decentralization, which is, I like it because it reminds me of the veil of ignorance.
From Rawls. I love it.
But with her concept is basically saying that lots of projects, in fact, probably most crypto projects, have an incentive to promote themselves as decentralized, not just for regulatory purposes, but also in order to be more covert and subtle about where power truly lies, and in so doing to avoid scrutiny and maybe even accountability if something goes wrong. But her point is that there's always power, even if it's not explicit. Even if there are explicit mechanisms which are promoted as being the mode through which power is exercised, those are often not really the true mechanisms.
Yeah.
Another point, which kind of makes me think of coin votes as not necessarily a genuine expression of power, but more of a cosmetic thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I think maybe I mentioned this to you before we recorded, but it's as if people see what they believe are inputs to a political process, not realizing that they were in fact outputs, and that the real inputs were some degrees removed from where they think they see power being exercised, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. So the coin, you're saying in a situation with coin votes, the votes themselves aren't necessarily a democratic ideal, an expression of power, but the real politics determines what topics are voted on and
Right.
who is fit to propose those topics. And
Yeah.
and I mean, really, it's also just the distribution of coins in the first place. How are those allocative decisions made, and so on.
Yep, exactly.
So, on the same topic of giving advice, because I think you're exceptionally well placed to do so, for a founder of a protocol who's contemplating all of these funding mechanisms, and there's a whole array, and I think Zcash was really, it typified a certain school of thought, especially back in when it launched, and I guess it launched in 2016, but the sale was in 2015, or the kind of foundation of the business.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it typified this school of thought of here's a new, interesting way to fund open source goods. You attach a token to them, and it funds the cryptography, which might otherwise go unremunerated, which I think is a pretty valid point. I mean, zero knowledge proofs, like undoubtedly the fact that Zcash exists has advanced that science.
Oh yeah, completely agree.
And now they're being used in all sorts of other places with ZK rollups. So it's pretty interesting to see the knock-on effects there. But as we've discussed, there's also downsides to that model. It's very tricky to maintain any notion of a founder's reward or ongoing development fund. You'd say the Ethereum community has now come to reject this idea as well. So what would you advise to someone that's thinking of creating, let's say a new protocol, and is contemplating, a construct like that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to call upon a reference that you made incidentally, that I think actually is pretty valid for understanding how you should develop fairer models of fundraising, which is in fact the mental exercise of Rawls's veil of ignorance. So if you do imagine yourself, you let's say you're a founder of one of these new protocols, and you just want to you have an initial set of conditions that you want to create to establish a new system of governance and protocol development and support the protocol long term, so that you have a degree of faith and confidence that it will continue to exist years and years, decades after you have stopped working on it. I think this is obviously improperly applied compared to what Rawls was suggesting doing, but I think applying that same mental exercise and basically putting yourself in a position where you don't know who you are in that ecosystem. You could be anybody. You might wind up being a user with no coins 5 years later. You might be the founder at one end. Like, if you exist in that system and you don't know what your identity will be as part of that system, how would you go about designing something that is fair and just and has appropriate sort of controls to maximize fairness, as one might say? And I don't know what an ideal system looks like. I think part of the fun of that exercise is that nobody does, and you have to try and do your best to establish one. But one approach, I think, as a heuristic that's a good one is you should work to establish a strong formal a strong formalized norm about what to expect with the funding model from the get-go. And if there's ever any possibility that that will ever change, you have to ensure that after that change happens, you no longer stand to benefit from it in any way, shape, or form. I think that's the right way to build something that can endure, in my mind.
You're actually calling upon a few of Rawls's principles there.
Hey, so he was a great read. I think more people could benefit from some political philosophy, but
I do like Rawls in the context of blockchain design because, look, these are inherently political systems. That much is clear. Effectively, we're creating governments and administrative bodies. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what we're doing. And the stakes are extremely high if you think that these are going to have some penetration as global monetary assets of consequence, which I think we both think that. And so, if you think about Rawls, he was trying to write down principles for how to design a political system from scratch, which seemed very quixotic when he was doing it in the 70s, because you can't actually do that in the real world. You kind of have to work with what you have. But in our strange new frontier, you can.
This is the only time I'm going to say this seriously, but with blockchain, you can.
With the abstract, brute, no article, capital B, blockchain.
TM pending.
The IBM formulation of blockchain. And you're right. And Rawls is exactly the go-to. I mean, you might alternatively go to his antagonist Nozick and say, well, you actually want the governors to be as minimalist as possible and really have the least amount of control, maybe even try and strip out all of that control possibility, which is sort of the Bitcoin thesis. But I think Rawls is absolutely worth contemplating, especially the veil of ignorance thought experiment, because it becomes so difficult to disentangle yourself from these debates. Everyone that has these debates has some privileged stance within one of these protocols. They're protocol proximate, as I like to say. So like when the DAO debate was being had, it was between people that had an interest in a resolution of the DAO situation one way or another. There weren't a lot of neutral third parties there. So the question is, can you design a system which, where you not having prior knowledge of your status within that system would find it to be pretty fair?
And that, I think to the degree that, it's possible, the idea of the sort of Nozick, Bitcoin ideal is like the preferred outcome, even if it results in slower protocol development, because of its sort of robustness and anti-fragility, and because you are minimizing actual political control in most places. But I think that is a singular event that probably can't be really truly emulated anymore. The genie's out of the bottle and it's impossible to do that again. So given that constraint, I think applying that lens of like, how do you develop a fair system when you have no ego associated with it and no identity in the resulting system is a great framework for figuring that out. And then making, really following through and saying, following through when, if changes occur in that system that could benefit you in some way, shape, or form, being able to see that, admit it, be transparent about it, and this is me drawing upon my ancestor a bit, but being dictator of Rome long enough to just say, all right, let's fix this, and now sure I have all this power and I'm allowed to keep it, but I don't want it. Go back to my farm.
So I guess that answers the last question, which is, are you really Roman in your origin.
Actually, yeah, my dad is Italian and came to America in, I think, 1960, and so that name is in fact Italian in origin. So I am, you know, either directly related to the great hero Cincinnatus, or what is more likely, related to one of his hundreds of indentured servants, I'm sure. Um, but it's kind of a fun name. It's really kind of I feel like I don't deserve the name. It's too cool for me.
It's nominative determinism. You shall. I don't know if what he's actually associated with. Maybe it's something terrible.
Well, I think like all things, he is supposedly a model of Roman virtue that people used to call upon. But I think the more that I read about it, the more I realize it was probably propaganda by people that were politically adjacent to Cincinnatus and wanted to promote his image. So, oh well.
Oh well, that's maybe you'll have a similar phenomenon. Maybe
Yeah.
Your sycophants will be ginning you up here. Maybe that's my role in all of this, is to create favorable propaganda.
Well, I appreciate you trying.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too.
Have wanted to have you on for a while. I think the timing is good. We could really have a frank discussion about this. I happen to think it's one of the more interesting case studies, really, in the history of governance in this industry.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's been out in the open too. Like a lot of the governance debates happen behind closed doors, but Zcash has been a very, very interesting model to follow from arm's length distance, for me at least.
Yeah, and now that I have a bit of distance from it as well, I really have to applaud everyone in the Zcash ecosystem for being as open as they are, and for being willing to debate these issues with a degree of depth and integrity that is honestly, I think, kind of rare, or happens behind closed doors in other projects. So it's a real. It felt really, really. It was a real honor to be a part of it, and to be in the thick of it, even though it was certainly stressing me out quite a bit for a while. I think it's providing a lot of positive guidance for people that are looking, at governance in their own ecosystems and trying to figure out how to resolve potentially big conflicts, which is what it's all about.
Well, Josh, what projects can we look forward to from you now?
Yeah. Well, to quote Monty Python, now for something completely different. I'm going to be doing a little bit of advising other projects on either foundation setups or governance and the like, and community building and the like. But I think actually my main approach, you will be surprised to hear, is that I'm going to be working on a little bit of a satire side project. It's my little bit of a hobby horse of mine. I've written satire for quite a while, but never tried to make a go of it. And I feel like there's a real gap in our little cottage industry of there's certainly the wonderful trollishness that you can find in any corner of any cryptocurrency community, but I feel like there's an opportunity for a more elevated long form satire that doesn't exist. So I'm going to be working on something like that that'll be out real soon, I hope. But yeah, something a bit more a bit more to my my crypto roots when I was you might have remembered some of my greatest hits, like Ponzico.win.
I do.
Yeah.
Was that a real? Were there funds exchanged?
Oh yeah.
Are we allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about. Sure, we can talk about it. It wasn't a lot of money, but yeah, there was like 10 ETH that came my way.
That's
as
a
a result.
material amount of ETH, Josh.
Well, hopefully not to the SEC or the IRS.
So let me see. So this was I remember it was a satirical
Yeah.
ICO. It was an explicit Ponzi, I guess.
Yep.
And you made a really nice white paper in
Yeah.
latex. I don't know how to pronounce that. I guess there's
I
some
think some people
fancy.
say LaTeX, but I also don't know how to
See,
pronounce it.
like all the computer science people know how to say these
Yeah.
things. That's the shibboleth. See, now you all know. I'm desperately ignorant about these things. Uh, and then people actually send you some ETH for your
Yeah.
satirical ICO.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the beauty of, so there's like the thing that made me super proud about that. In addition, I mean, it was just fun to write, but it got quoted in a Matt Levine column, and he added his own spin to it, and it made me so happy. And yeah, truthfully, like what my goal is like I would like to produce something maybe not quite Ponzico.win quality, but something close to that, something like that once a week, in some other, in some model or context that I'm still trying to figure out how to make economical. But yeah, I want to do something like that. I think it would be really fun and a very distinct and different pace for me after being in uh, in the real boiler room of cryptocurrency governance. So it'll be fun.
Well, the crypto world desperately needs satire.
Oh yeah.
The enthusiasts are too sincere, and the
Mhm.
detractors are too angry to produce good satire. I've never met a crypto hater who has any humor whatsoever.
Oh yeah.
They're
Yeah.
all kind of just blindingly angry.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, if you're clever and active in the crypto industry, then you're just going to be, fully long these assets, including
Yeah.
from an intellectual perspective, which also leads to a humorlessness. So
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
satire.
Yeah, I think that's extraordinary. Like that is absolutely apt analysis of why there is this blind spot. Because people will say obviously that the crypto industry is filled with lots of funny people, but it seems like they always have an agenda that is quite heavily correlated to the weight of their bags, intellectually or otherwise. Um,
Myself
and
included.
yeah,
Myself
and
included.
me too. But I think if I make my aim to just do that for a little while, and focus on it, I can try and untether myself from said bags, at least intellectually, long enough
Yeah.
to make a good run of it.
I was
Um,
thinking about this today. I think to be truly comedic, you have to be unshackled from some political objective.
yeah,
And like if you look at the life cycle of Sacha Baron Cohen's
yeah,
comedy, he's become
yeah,
less and less entertaining as he's become more of a scold and more intent on achieving certain political objectives,
yeah,
whereas he had far more levity and creative freedom earlier
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Not to, segue this into an analysis of
Oh no, that's okay. I mean,
Mhm.
if we want to do another episode on like absurdism as an approach to effective comedy, I'd be all all in on that.
We'll have you
Um,
back. We'll have you back.
nice, excellent. Um, but yeah, I had a lot of fun talking about this, Nick. It's always great to have such a wonderful interlocutor to ask really pointed questions in a way that teases out answers that I don't think I would have had on my own. So I deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, and I honestly do think this is an incredibly important topic. We did cover it to a certain extent with James Prestwich. I'll also link
Yeah,
some of the things that James wrote about with
yeah,
Zcash. Very
yeah. It's
sharp
great
take,
reading.
very
Yep.
sharp takes, but
Oh yeah.
warranted. I think having that level of introspection is incredibly valuable,
Yeah.
especially from people with the credibility of James. And we're adding to um, that kind of corpus right now.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Josh. Look forward
Yeah.
to hearing from you and seeing what you come up with next.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Nick.